Instagram model who was killed in an apparent murder-suicide is now speaking out. We first told you about the death of Miss Mercedes Morr.
We often live our lives believing we are in control, that the people we cherish will always be with us. But life has a way of shattering those illusions. One moment, someone is right there, and in the next, they are gone forever. What happens when the love, stability, and safety we so often lose sight of are violently snatched away from us? How are we meant to cope with the fragility of life and the realization that someone we love can be taken from us in an instant by someone that we don't even know? In 2021, one family faced that tragic realization on a worldwide stage. They were not just reeling from the untimely and brutal death of their loved one, but from the judgmental eyes of strangers and the media alike. Their grief was broadcast and criticized by the world. But how had this come to be? If you asked anyone who loved her, Mercedes Morr and Jeanne Gagné were two different people. Mercedes was a wildly popular influencer who liked to party, post daring photos, and be as goofy and happy-go-lucky as possible. Then there was Jeanne, always smiling, more reserved, and fiercely dedicated to her family. Born in Houston to a caring mother and father who were both members of the military, Jeanne was loved from the moment she graced the earth. Though her parents loved her and their family deeply, they divorced when Jeanne was still young, causing her to split her time between California and Texas at a very young age. But she took this travel in stride, learning all she could from both sides of the country and making friends wherever she went. But she didn't just have a friendly and kind spirit, she had the spirit of an entrepreneur. Therefore, when Jeanne was just 12, she set up a business in her father's garage, braiding people's hair for $60 a pop. It was her version of babysitting or mowing lawns, and she was incredibly talented at it. Soon she roped her siblings into joining her. From the get-go, Jeanne loved fashion and all things beauty. She knew the power that your appearance could give you, and, at the same time, she knew the bond and connection that self-care could help form between people. Starting when she was just a teen, she'd have almost weekly spa nights with her mother, doing each other's nails, catching up, and watching TV. But even as she entered her teen years and problems arose, these nights continued. It's not unusual for teenagers to act out as they are struggling to find their identity, but Jeanne was unfortunate enough to have a longer journey than most. Therefore, in high school, she frequently got in fights and found herself roped up in drama. As most teens do, she told her parents that she couldn't wait to move out and be on her own when she graduated and turned 18. But when she did turn 18 and her father presented her with a suitcase so she could move out, Jeanne burst into tears. Her father wrapped her in his arms, of course, and reassured her that she would always have a home with him. That story became a favorite of both Jeanne and her family, a symbol of the strength of her family's bond and her ability to accept her flaws and grow as a person. Soon after her graduation, Jeanne went to college to be a dental hygienist. However, shortly into her studies, she fell in love. Unsure of what exactly she wanted to do with her life, she moved to Las Vegas with her boyfriend at the time. 19 is a particularly challenging age. People are trying to figure themselves out and find their way in the world, and Jeanne was no exception. Soon after moving to Vegas, it became clear to her that her vibrant personality, strength, and beauty alone could earn her a steady income. She began working as a professional dancer at a club. At first, her family was hesitant. They worried for her safety, but Jeanne had always been one to take her privacy very seriously, in spite of her friendliness and outgoing personality. Plus, it was difficult to argue with how much money she was making. Just a few months into working at the club, Jeanne was making $5,000 in a single weekend. That was more than enough to pay her rent, save for retirement, and pay for monthly trips back home to see her family, who she spoke to every single day. Ultimately, her parents were proud to see their daughter flourishing and happy. At her heart, after all, Jeanne was a businesswoman. Throughout her time dancing at the club, she continued to work her way up the ladder, making connections with people in the party and the music scene. It didn't take long before she was partying with increasingly famous people like Offset and Drake. Her personality and drive was infectious. Around that same time, her Instagram account skyrocketed. Naturally, she went by the same name that she went by on stage, Mercedes Morr. Mercedes, because she was working for a life of luxury, and more because of how dedicated she was to cultivating abundance in her life. Her Instagram began to grow even more. At her peak, she had 2.6 million followers, more than many famous actors and actresses. She knew what to post to hold people's attention, yet she maintained a brand that felt relatable and unsnobby. To further boost her following, she created an OnlyFans account, posting semi-explicit content to thousands of loyal fans. But because of her job, Janae struggled to find someone who loved her for her and wasn't jealous of the way she made a living. Therefore, she struggled with men for years who used her and then refused to commit. But eventually, she found someone who couldn't imagine life without her bubbly personality. The two moved back to Houston together, and Janae even began to talk about marriage and kids, something her family had never heard her mention before. By the time 2021 rolled around, Janae was at the happiest point in her life. She had a loving partner, a bright future, a wonderful family, and millions of adoring fans.
Just like she had a few million followers, that's all fine and good, but she was a person.
According to Janae's mother, Janae's famous in her world, but she is loved in ours. But that fame came at a price. With the eyes of millions of people comes adoration, criticism, and, perhaps the worst of all, obsession. The bright lights and glamour of social media cast dark shadows into the real lives of those smiling for the cameras. In Janae's case, those dark shadows snuck up on her and consumed her, in spite of absolutely everything she did to cast them out. In August 2021, Janae was living a life many of us dream of. She posted on Instagram and her various social media accounts almost daily, and the final week of August was no different. She spoke with her mother, father, and her sister London constantly, updating them with how excited she was for her partner to come back from a trip he was on. In one call, Janae asked her father if he would come stay with her for a few days. With her partner gone, she wanted someone else there to be with her and keep her safe. Her father, though a doting, caring man, already had plans for a fishing trip, so he couldn't stay with her. Janae told him it was fine with a smile. After all, she had recently moved to one of the safest gated communities near Houston. You needed a code to get into the gated complex, a code to get out, and keys to access different parts of the property. The fences were too high to jump over, and security was always on high alert with surveillance running 24/7. Janae had specifically picked the complex because of her need for safety. With her fame came notoriety, and with it came people who were eager to post her public information. After an incident where she was doxxed and fans began to show up at her home, Janae moved to her last home, where she was sure that couldn't happen. But what Janae didn't know, however, was just how deep obsession can run. As she settled in going about her daily schedule behind the bars and locked doors of her community, there was someone who was no longer content lurking behind a screen. Janae knew she had stalkers, and she knew she had obsessed fans. But nothing could have prepared her or her family for just how dangerous one man's fixation on her would become, or what absolute tragedies it would lead to. Out there was a stranger consumed by his obsession and need for ownership over Janae, even though he didn't truly know the first thing about her. It didn't matter to him, because in his mind, Janae belonged to him, and he was going to stop at nothing to get her. It was August 29th, 2021, when Janae's father received a worrying call. His youngest daughter, London, hadn't heard from Janae in a few days, and she was growing concerned. Janae wasn't returning her calls, and she hadn't posted on social media since the 17th, which was highly unlike her. Something was wrong. They just had no idea how wrong it was. Janae's father raced to her complex, using the code to get in that only he and her immediate family had. As he entered, the gates closed behind him. A thought splashed across his mind that had probably crossed Janae's dozens of times. There was no way anyone's sneaking into here, right? When he got to Janae's door, his stomach sank. His daughter's car, her pride and joy, was sitting in the driveway. With her partner on a trip, her father realized that she had to be home. He pounded on the door, heart racing with every increasingly hard knock. He didn't hear a single sound on the other side, which only panicked him more. Terrified that something had happened to his daughter, he broke down the door and tragically took a step into his worst nightmare. Janae, his darling baby girl, was laying at the bottom of the stairs, beaten and bloody. The girl he had taught to ride a bike, the little angel he had watched shepherd her sister around on her handlebars, giggling. She was lying cold on the floor. Her whole future, her dream of motherhood, her dream of supporting her parents in retirement and beyond, it was gone. The sight of her was not only heartbreaking and filled with immeasurable grief, it was gruesome. Her leg was bent unnaturally beneath her, and her clothes were shredded and torn. Just days ago, they were laughing on the phone, chatting and bonding as always. And now her father was in tears, standing over his daughter's body because of the selfishness and delusions of a crazed stalker. But little did her father know, he was about to stare that crazed stalker in the face. Her father heard a noise upstairs. He raced up the stairs into Jeanne's bedroom. What awaited him seems as though it was snatched right out of a horror movie. Blood was smeared across the floor. Writing in lipstick and pen marred the walls, each terrifying sentence reading more deranged than the last. I was used for money. I should have stayed in Florida. Sorry to the landlord and community. I hurt a lot of people, okay? Jeanne led me to think she cared about me, but wore another man's ring. The man who wrote those statements was still alive, laying on the floor just feet in front of Jeanne's father. Blood was smeared across his shirt, neck, and the floor. A large knife stuck out of his neck. He looked up into Jeanne's father's eyes as he laid there, gurgling on his own blood and dying. "What did you do?" Jeanne's father screamed, but the man didn't answer. The last thing he saw as he died on the floor was the look of anguish on Jeanne's dad's face. Jeanne's father has repeatedly stated that no one should have to go through the experience that he has been put through. His grief is immeasurable, and nothing can bring his shining star back. Jeanne's father phoned the police, and they arrived swiftly to the violent crime scene. The man who killed Jeanne was dead upon their arrival. He was determined to be Kevin Accorto.
We now know the name of the man accused of killing a Richmond Instagram model in an apparent murder-suicide, and police say the two did not have any type of relationship.
A name that wasn't familiar to anyone, likely not even Jeanne herself. He was a 34-year-old resident of Florida who had only been in custody for minor traffic violations. How he had gotten into Jeanne's apartment was completely unknown. Law enforcement found no messages between the two, indicating that Jeanne knew him in any other capacity than him being a follower. Yet there was no evidence of a break-in. It is widely speculated that he gained access to the home by posing as a worker to trick Jeanne, or by sneaking in through a back window. Regardless of how he entered, his intentions and his obsession was made clear by the marks on the wall. Jeanne's family was terribly shocked. They had all loved Jeanne beyond words, and in an instant, they had lost her with no explanation. To cope with their grief, the family held candlelight vigils and clung to one another for comfort. Around the world, people were stunned by Jeanne's death. Drake went on to release an album dedicated to Jeanne and spoke openly about her passing.
His second home dedicated his new album, Certified Lover Boy, to Miss Mercedes Morr, writing a combination of toxic masculinity and acceptance of truth, which is inevitably heartbreaking.
Nicki Minaj and other famous parties spoke about her, making the dangers of fame known. Like any star, Jeanne's public life portrayed the glamour of fame. But beneath the luxury brand deals and fancy vacations, there's a much more grim reality that many are urging people to see. When you put yourself out there, you're not only gaining adoration from kind people, you're gaining hatred and obsession from unstable ones. Because of one man's instability, Jeanne's father will forever have to live with the horror of that final image of his daughter. Because of one man's instability, Jeanne's partner has lost the love of his life and the future mother of his children. But it wasn't just the loss of Jeanne that was staggering. It was the public's unwarranted comments on her passing. Some people took to online forums to state that Jeanne was asking for danger by putting herself out there, or even that she deserved her death because of her profession. But Jeanne offered a service. She worked hard for the followers and fame she gained, and it's clear how much that cost her, even when she was alive. The callous comments of strangers about their daughter's occupation still haunt her family to this day, and in their mind, besmirch her memory. Therefore, Jeanne's passing created a larger discussion about not only online safety, but the dangers of parasocial relationships. Parasocial relationships are, essentially, one-sided relationships. An obsessed fan may believe that they truly know, love, and are loved by a public figure that they are fixated on. They may grow feelings of ownership over them and have strong, unfounded expectations of the person they admire, even if they don't know them. This can lead to significant emotional investment and, in some cases, affect their real-life relationships and self-perception. We are at a crossroads in society, and Johnny's death has made many people examine how we got here and how we can expect to move forward. How much can we post online without putting our lives at risk? In a time where so much connection and so many relationships are fostered through phone screens, is it realistic to forgo social media altogether? Jenny was incredibly careful on social media. After being doxxed years prior to 2021, she made sure never to post places she frequented, photos of views from her house, her car, or anything related to where she lived. Yet many believe it is this single photo of her standing in front of her front door that led to her killer tracking her down. Even with the numbers of the door obscured, her home was still discovered. In a world where anything can be uncovered if you're dedicated enough, how can any of us be safe? How can we, as a society, protect ourselves in a world where the lines between the digital and real blur so easily? In a world where we are rewarded for our online presence and our transparency? Is there anything you do to keep yourself safe in our current era where our online personas and offline lives are so intertwined? Do you think there should be more strict rules surrounding social media in general? Share your thoughts below on how we can combat this issue and prevent more tragedies like this from happening. Working together and finding solutions that make us safer as a society is our only way to work through this new, confusing world of technology. If you're interested in hearing more stories about the dangers of obsession for unsuspecting victims, make sure to watch our video about racist cops who allowed the killer of Felicia Johnson to walk out of the police station freely. Thank you, armchair detectives, for following me through this case. Remember to subscribe for more stories that matter, and be sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss our next important video. Keep sleuthing, and until next time.